I'm going to talk to you about the development of software for artistically influenceable simulations and visual effects with the help of HPC. Now, what is this mysterious letter combination HPC? It's high-performance computing. So the goal of my project here is to demonstrate how useful high-performance computing can be when we use it to create artistic content. One of the main points of the project is to use open source software. There are two main reasons for this. One is because we want to develop it further, so it's good that it's customizable. We get the open source code and we can modify it to our needs. And the other thing is if we want to use it on a supercomputer that has multiple nodes, then we don't have any licensing issues that we would normally have on commercial softwares. And the way I choose to do this is to construct a prototype for this distributed computing fluid simulations. And we use a content creation GUI to drive this simulation. So I have chosen simulation engine Palabos and content creation interface Blender. I will describe them both later. So, why would we want to use high-performance computing? I'm sure you've all heard of parallelization. That is when we take a single task, like this big blue block here, and we try to run it on one computer and see that it's way too big for this single computer. So what we can do is we can divide it into n parts, and then we distribute it to n cores for processing. Let's add some more. And we see that they fit nicely into the computers. And then after it's all done, we just take the results back and collate them. So this works particularly well with physical simulations, for example, atomistic or fluid simulations. The reason there being that there's a high number of mostly independent events that are occurring in a large volume, such as this one here. So what do I mean by independent events? You can imagine if it were a crowd simulation, lots of people everywhere. Say one box is one person. If you have this person here bump into this person, they will feel each other, but this person over here will not care. It's so far away that there's no influence. So there's some kind of independence going on between things that are far away. That means that there doesn't need to be any communication between the nodes that are far away either, only some that are very close to each other. The way this communication is handled, there's several possibilities. One is OpenMP, which is basically shared memory parallelization, which is implemented in many applications today. It's fairly automatic. You just tell the code that please run this within the shared memory, and it will do it. For instance, in your desktop that may have 8, 16, 24 cores, it will be distributed accordingly to all these cores. But if you want to use even more cores, then you need to do something special. For instance, MPI, which stands for Message Passing Interface. This means that the code has to be deconstructed and distributed separately to each of these little boxes. And messages are then passed between them. Sort of what is happening when this guy bumps into the other guy. It needs to be a message that I'm doing this bumping. Now this could work on a cluster of connected machines, but it works especially well on high-performance computing materials like a supercomputer, because they have usually specialized interconnect networks where the communication between these small parts is more efficient. So, the supercomputer I'm using is the one at the Höchstleistungszentrum in Stuttgart. Now, technically speaking, it's a Cray XC40. It has a pet name Hazel. Its peak performance is 7,420 teraflops, which makes it the fastest in the EU, at least the last time I checked a couple of minutes ago. The number of compute nodes, it has 7,712. A node is basically like an individual computer that is connected to this big machine. And basically like your desktop computer, it has a number of nodes, cores. Each node has 24 of them. So if you multiply 7,712 by 24, you get 185,088. Compared to my desktop at work, it has 4. So there is a huge amount of computing power there available for us. Speaking of power, Cray uses about 3,200 kilowatts of power when it's fully operational. Compare it to some nice local car like the Mercedes-Benz E200, which can produce about 135 kilowatts at 5,000 RPM, you would need 24 of those cars somehow put in parallel to produce the same amount of power that is being consumed by this computer. That's why it has a nice cooling system. Hums very loud. Okay, so why do we want to use Blender? As I mentioned, it's open source and there's no issues with licensing on multiple nodes. It's very nice software, it's available here. You can download it for free. And it's not just a toy, I mean, it's a viable competitor against commercial alternatives like Maya or Houdini. It even has won an award, or maybe even more. The one I found is this last year's SIGGRAPH Jury's Choice Award winner for this beautiful animation of the magical washing machine. You can also view it for free in the internet somewhere. So the native fluid simulation engine of Blender is called LBeam, which uses the lattice-Boltzmann method, hence the name LBM, LBeam. Very imaginative. And why do we use Palabos? That is the fluid simulation engine we use to bypass LBeam. Also open source, freely available at this other address here. And it also uses the lattice-Boltzmann method, so it's easy to compare the results with Blender. The name Palabos, also very imaginative, is parallel lattice-Boltzmann solver. And it has been parallelized with MPI, which I mentioned earlier, this message passing interface. So it's highly distributable, not just on one single desktop with a shared memory, but it's been tested by the makers of the software on up to over 16,000 cores. So that is like a supercomputer right there. Now we put these two together and we get this. It is the Palabos Blender prototype. We will come up with a name shortly. So if you recognize this, it is the Blender interface. Right here is a nice water scene of water coming. You will see what it looks like animated later. Here you have the fluid simulation interface of Blender itself. And here on the left, we have my addition to it, which is the Palabos simulation. It uses many of the parameters that are being used by Blender itself, and in addition several of its own. I know the resolution is not very good, but there's just a bunch of parameters you can put in, basically. The important parts being this button right here, which says execute locally. I know what it says, so. That means if you click on that and you have Palabos installed on your computer, it will run it on your own desktop, which is useful for testing, but what you really want to do is send to cluster. When you press on that and you have your cluster set up to receive your simulation, then it will run it on the cluster. I mean, I have done it with the HLRS, Hazel, but you could basically do it on any other cluster. Just need to set it up. Right. So, how do they perform? So, LBeam tends to be a little bit faster in desktop speeds when you have just a simple simulation that you run with a very low resolution. But this is quickly overtaken by Palabos when you put it on the supercomputer. I have a graph here. The green triangles being the LBeam on a desktop, and the red circles being Palabos on a supercomputer. As we increase the resolution, you can see that exponentially the time required with Blender increases. At a resolution of 800, it's not even possible to run. There is a memory issue, it will crash, but even if it did run, it would take days maybe. But here with Palabos on the supercomputer, it's all a matter of minutes. We just need to keep adding nodes, and since it parallelizes nicely, it will run very fast. So it's a big speed advantage there. Other advantages that Palabos has, physical accuracy. Actually, Palabos was made as an engineering tool by some folks in Lausanne, Switzerland, and it's being used as such in many industrial applications. So it's actually very physically accurate. What this means is that if we render the results, it looks really realistic. And also, we can boost the resolution. What I mentioned earlier is that with LBeam, if you boost the resolution wantonly, it will crash eventually. It's not made for that. But with Palabos, you just increase the detail. You get smaller and smaller resolution, which is really nice. So, I have an example. Let's see if it will run. So this is actually a case where we had some students do trailers for the ITFS this year about a beaver that gets into all kinds of trouble. And one scene was where the beaver just flees, and we decided to try this with water running after him. So let's see how it worked out. It's quite short, but it's a trailer. We can see it again. So that's the water. I did that. Some students did the rest. Okay. So to conclude what we have done, or by we I mean I, a working prototype for a physically accurate high-resolution simulation with just a fraction of the time requirement that you would have on a desktop. But still, okay, if we look at core hours, it's still a high computational cost, but the supercomputer will do that for you. You just worry about the clock time. All the software that I've been using is open source, so there's zero cost, and there are no licensing issues about continuing to develop it or about distributing it on the supercomputer. If you're interested, the source code will be made available shortly on GitHub once we figure out a really nice sounding name for it. That's the basic requirement. There's some future research, of course, being planned. We could implement other fluid simulation engines, like particle-based ones, which tend to be a bit faster than Lattice-Boltzmann, even though we sacrifice some physical accuracy for it. But if we do cartoons like that, nobody's going to notice. So that's one possibility. Also, the commercial things, maybe there will be licensing issues, but if somebody says, okay, we want to put Houdini's solver there, or Maya's, or Phoenix, or whatever, it's possible to do that. You just need to program it differently. Right, so thank you for your attention. Here's my contact, and here's the Beaver one more time.
Yeah, there's time for questions now. If you have some right away.
Did you consider the viability of running this on a more conventional render cluster?
Well, it's possible, yes. Well, we did consider it, and it will run. As I believe I mentioned, you can adapt this to any cluster or any distributed mechanism. It just happens to be a bit more efficient on the supercomputer because of the special interconnect.
Because I'm thinking that most studios probably have like a render farm at hand, but on
yes,
HPC.
We have a render farm at the Filmakademie. We haven't tried it there, but there's much more cores available on the supercomputer anyway.
And additional to that question, is this tested also with a CPU cores or also a GPU?
Well, this works exclusively on CPUs, so that's how the Palabos was programmed. Of course, just the basic interface part, you could plug it in and make another simulation engine work, and that could be implemented with a GPU.
Further questions? I had one.
Okay.
What about the meshing? Is it performed also on the supercomputer? Or?
Yes, we did a lot of work on that. So originally it would mesh its own simulation and output as STLs, but since we wanted it to be compatible with Blender, we figured out what Blender reads, and that's something called a binary object file that has been gzipped, and we just output them as such for Blender to read.
But you leave everything on the supercomputer to get the images?
Well, the rendering was done not on the supercomputer.
Not on the supercomputer. Well, further questions are later together with a beer outside. And thank you very much, Ari, for the very first